The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of War 40K podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very special guest, Scott Ketcham, who just came first overall at the Canadian Open Games Workshop event in Edmonton, Canada. Congratulations, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. This is my first best overall, so I was actually very surprised, but pleasantly so. I had a lot of fun at the event, and I'm excited to dig into it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who don't know, we usually cover best generals, people who go undefeated through the entire event and cover their 8-0 run or their 5-0 run, whatever it may be. In this case, Scott won best overall, which is a 50-50 combination of the paint score and your performance in the first 6 rounds of the tournament. And that's no easy feat. Let me tell you, there are some spectacular painters that come to this thing. And also you have to win most of your games to even be considered good enough to be eligible for this reward. So, Scott, it's a really impressive thing, and I'm super excited to talk about it. In part 1 of this episode, we're going to break down Scott's list, the sisters, how they work, the new sisters after the previous balanced data slate, and what is cooking with them. And then, of course, for our patrons, in part 2, we are going to go through round by round all of Scott's games, including the 1 or 2 he may have had a bumpy road on the way. We're going to cover his losses and what he could have done better to even improve those skills further. You're not going to want to miss this one, folks. You can subscribe on patreon.com/AOW40K. $5 a month gets you access to this part 2, along with 297 other part 2s. We are closing on that episode 300, and we can't do without all your wonderful support. So I want to thank you all so much for listening. All right, Scott, that is enough of the rambling. Let's get into it. Tell me about you. Last time we had you on the podcast was like last year after your run at the Tacoma Open event from Games Workshop. So what have you followed your sisters and how have you found them since then?
Yeah, so at Tacoma, I played Bringers of Flame, and I had a blast. It was so much fun. Fast guns are good, as we all know. And then I took Bringers to World Champs with a couple of exorcists because societal pressure was telling me to take exorcists, but I didn't have as much fun with them. But over the last, through the late summer, fall, winter, sisters were recognized as being a little bit too strong, particularly with that Bringers of Flame detachment. So they took a couple nerfs. And then, after the new year, we were sitting pretty poor. And most of us were struggling. At that time, I had pivoted to Hallowed Martyrs, where I thought the most juice was. And I thought that that was the best attachment in the context of all the nerfs of the Bringers of Flame and the Sisters Army in general. And I did okay. I think I went 4-1 at a GT. I played a teams event where I was kind of just like the glutton for punishment and trying to be the draw machine. But I found that I really wasn't having as much fun with the Hallowed Martyrs playstyle, which is like very it is tradey, and that's kind of sisters in general, but like even more so is like very responsive, and you kind of throw out these solo characters and try to like win by gimmicks and tricks and fight phase manipulation and characters that stand up on death. But I kind of missed all the fun that I was having with Bringers of Flame. And so when the most recent data slate dropped, where we got some points drops on some guns, like the Castigators, the Immolator, the Warsuits, and even the Triumph. And we got a few of our Miracle dice back after the data slate in the spring. And I was like, you know what? I think it's time. I think it's time the Bringers come back. And I decided to run them for the Canadian Open in Edmonton. And boy, was it fun. I was really happy that I went to Bringers at that time.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that journey. I know I myself found my sister's journey very similar, where I was running the Broken Bringers, and then, WCW happened, and I was also feeling that societal pressure. I think you and I might have talked about that quite a bit, about running Exorcists, and I think a lot of what I found is that sisters just weren't that fun anymore in their play styles after all the nerfs. I found a little bit of love and excitement in the Champions of Faith attachment. Did you have any hope for that one in the Grotmus time?
I played it like once or twice, and it was pretty cool. And it's nice to put Sacrosanct back on the table because their models were really great. And I I just like them. But the thing I found about the Champions of Faith and like the few test games I played is like they're pretty decent into factions or armies that have a hard time dealing with 30 bodies that have a 3-up, 4-up, 5-up, and that can resurrect. But I feel like you're just relying on not running into the army or the faction that can pass that stat check. And there are just, I feel like with 1,000 Suns on release and Death Guard on release, I just kind of felt like they could just kind of mow over those bodies. And all the tricks you're getting from Resurrection and Feel No Pains and 3-up, they're still like 1 wounds T3 ladies. And I just didn't feel comfortable, hoping that my opponent could pass the stat check. And that was kind of the limitation I saw with the Champions of Faith. There's like a SKU list floating around the Discord, which is our Sister Act 40K Discord, that is like mostly melee and Champions of Faith plus Vahl, which seems kind of fun. But again, I feel like SKU lists aren't the type of lists that you want to bring to singles events. So I thought about Champions of Faith, but I ultimately landed on Bringers because it was something I was like comfortable with. I felt like I was good at it, and I was having a lot of fun with it. So that made it seem a little bit more obvious. Although McWhirp, Brendan McKenzie, another Sisters player, will tell you differently because he and I chat all the time, and he could tell you secretly that our chat was me just constantly fretting over what I'm going to bring and what minor tweaks I'm going to make to my list and all this. But it's part of the fun for me. It's like coming up with a new list design after the changes.
Yeah, I love that. I found very similar facts with the Champions of Faith attachment. It's at the end of the day, sisters aren't here to be durable, and as much as you can try to be durable with it, the lethality of the game has gone up with Death Guard and Thousand Suns releasing and Emperor's Children still being scary. Like, you can't just be toughness 3/1/1 bodies anymore. It just doesn't really work.
Yeah. And I think what I found I really value is mobility, movement, speed, right? And just being able to control space on the table and control where my opponent can hit me and, keeping the guns alive in that context. And I feel like Bringers offers the best way to do that. Champions kind of takes it in a different way, and they throw 30 bodies at you while you're trying to keep the Cascader machine going. But what I found is like, no, let's just add more gun. And rather than trying to throw 30 Sacrosants and hope they pass the stat check, let's just use our speed, our Seraphim, our other bodies to screen and move, block, and score. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brought you to your Bringers of Flame list, which is a little bit of a reworked version of your predecessor list. How have you found Bringers of Flame have survived since their detachment has been nerfed kind of repeatedly at this point?
Yeah, I actually think that they're in a pretty good spot. Like, I don't think they're the best army in the game by any means. But, like when you guys think about your faction tier lists and stuff, like I feel like they're a well-balanced, strong army that can hold its own in the hands of a good player. And that's kind of how I felt at Edmonton. We'll explore obviously a little bit more about the challenges I faced in those matches where I either drew or lost. But I do think they're a pretty good faction. I played Liberator Assault Group. I played Thousand Suns. I played Necrons. Like I played CSM. I feel like I played some, challenging meta factions and still did pretty well. I think the things that I lost from my Tacoma list and my LGT list were the Punchy Palatine, who requires Miracle Dice to fuel her Righteous Rage. So not only did I not have the points for her, but also it just didn't feel like I had the Miracle Dice to actually make her strong. So she fell out of the list. And then I think maybe I lost like one other character, but what I gained instead was 3x5 squads of Seraphim, which, I sacrificed that little extra punchy character for more tools that control space, move, block, score, etc.
I love Seraphim. They're one of my favorite parts of running Sisters. I'm so glad you found success with running them. How did you find them during the tournament? Were they good?
Oh, yeah. And so occasionally their flamers came in handy, right? Like strength 4 and then strength 5 if you're within 6 inches, and often getting AP1 from your castigators. But it's so nice to just yeet them next to a Triumph. And depending on your advanced roll, if we have a 6, you're going up to 21 inches plus a scoot. So I'd often start two of my three squads on the table, and then one squad in deep strike just to have the deep strike threat. But frankly, I think they're more useful when they start on the table and you can control where you want to go even better than you could if you came in 9 inches away from something. So yeah, they were excellent.
Yeah. Love to hear that. I want to hear kind of from your perspective, like if you could just walk through the entire list top to bottom, and then we'll kind of break it down from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Morvin Vahl, obviously, the Triumph of St. Catherine. I have 3 immolators, and they will each be splitting a squad of 10 girls. And the 3 different squads of 10 girls I brought were 10 novitiates, 10 dominions with melta guns, 10 battle sisters. Then I also had 3 castigators, 3 squads of 5 seraphim, and before I forget, 3 paragon warsuits to go with Vahl. I always forget to mention them because they're just pretty much
it's a unit,
auto
right? The Volgons, right? It's part of the name.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Nice.
So I could dive into each one of those components and why I think they're useful. So I think the Triumph coming down in points was integral to running a successful Bringers of Flame list in the style that I like to run it. For a couple of reasons. One is the movement is just gas. Like when you get extra 3 inches of movement on everything, it really allows you to get your weapon platforms in the places they need to be, but also allows you to control space on the table, get your Seraphim where they need to be, or anything coming out of the transport, etc. And it also allows you to project threat in deployment too. So it gives you a leg up turn 1. When you're reviewing what your army can do turn 1, and you tell them like, oh yeah, my immolator can scout 6, and then it can advance up to 21 inches and then still drop off the 5 girls with melta guns. Your opponent has to think very carefully about what they want to put in that threat range.
Right.
So the movement is one thing from the Triumph, but the other thing is the auto 6. So what this allows you to do is game the math a little bit. Having an auto 6 in the bank against opponents' anti-vehicle weapons that are like high AP and high damage, you can feel more comfortable and you can control how much damage your vehicles are likely to take. So, for example, I might have, let's say I'm playing Tyranids and there are 2 Tyrannifex, right? Well, I can safely step out a castigator in potential line of sight of 1 Tyrannifex and say, you know what? Even if it shoots me, it's probably tempting from my opponent. It draws a Tyrannifex out into a position I want to be in. And even if it shoots me, it's just not going to kill me because I have a 6 in the bank. And your opponents don't necessarily always account for that. So it allows you to kind of manipulate the board state in different ways. So the auto 6, I think, is really, really important, plus the movement. So the Triumph feels like a must in the way I like to play Bringers of Flame.
Right. Question on that. I also love the Triumph. She went down 15, right, in the previous bound slate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised that was like the difference maker for you in terms of whether she was going to make or not. But I guess everything kind of went down 10 to 15, exactly. So it added up across the board.
Exactly.
Right?
It wasn't just her coming down. It was the fact that all the immolators came down, or the 3 immolators came down, the 3 castigators came down, the warsuits came down, and the Triumph came down. So, even though she's still pretty costly, I think that the drops you get elsewhere in the list means that it justifies taking her.
Right. My question regarding Triumph in terms of usage, you mentioned how you have that 6 in Miracle Dice was awesome for those super powerful shots. You just auto pass them like a Melta or a Tyrannifex. Mm-hmm. That's all well and good. How often did you use them for an advance roll to make sure you could just go 21 inches or something? Or did you leave that more up to fate and save them for defense or offense on damage?
Well, I think, as you might guess, it totally depends on the scenario. And it all depends on whether or not there was a movement that was a certain distance that was integral to achieving the game plan. So if I needed that 21 inches to get the Seraphim base past the base of whatever model my opponent had fielded at that distance in order to get them past the lines and move block everything behind it, well then, yeah, sure, I'd use the 6. But if I only needed a 4 or 5 to get there, then I would do my best to save the 6 for the integral save, right? And it also depends on, I think, like, knowing the profiles of your opponent's weapons. So like those big guns that are high damage but only AP3. Well, there are scenarios there where between cover and armor of contempt, your vehicles are saving on a 4, right? So you may not need to save the 6 for the save if you alternatively have a 4. So I think having a good understanding of your opponent's profiles plus the dice that you need in order to get to the position you want to be in, or the dice that you need to make that save, allows you to kind of pivot and use those dice in different ways. And then the last thing that I'll add is like, I'll also use them for movement. If, for example, I need a 5 for my advance in order to get my castigator within rapid fire range, right? So that's 4 additional autocannon shots that I don't want to give up that turn. So I'll drop the miracle dice there. But most of the time, I think, my dice were used for advance rolls, save rolls, and then sometimes I'll throw in a damage roll, or I'll throw in like a 4-up invuln roll for the Nundams.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, appreciate that. So tell me about the rest of your list and how it all came together.
Yeah. So it's 3 squads of 10 gals. So the Novitiates, Dominions, and Battle Sisters. That split was chosen, one, because you turn into a parking lot without scout. So I think you need at least some Dominions, and they're pretty excellent at doing the mission play and the reactive moves and kind of putting your opponents in positions that they may not want to be in. The Dominions, the Novitiates are there to have 5 models that have scout, infiltrate. But I don't know. On the maps I was playing, I didn't feel like I really needed them all that badly. And we'll get into that, obviously. And then the 5 Battle Sisters were for the sticky, which there's some indirect in the meta, like triple plate first crawler. And I just didn't really have anything to hold my backfield if I got indirected. So I was like, well, might as well have a few gals for sticky. And the OC is nice too, right? Like if you're thinking about primary denial, the Novitiates and the Battle Sisters each have OC2. So that can be really useful.
Oh, I didn't realize Novitiates were OC2 also. That's a lot of OC you're packing in these little packages. Nice.
Yep. So that's the split between the 3 squads of 10 gals. I think 3 immolators is where I still want to be, because it's just always nice to have the strip cover. Mm-hmm. And I think having, again, the 3, so you end up with like 6 squads of 5 gals, which is really useful. And it's not so much like you're packing all the firepower, like you could like substituting some of the stuff for a Canis Rex, for example. But you do, I think, have a lot of opportunity to control board space and keep your firepower alive. So that's kind of what I like about it.
Right.
And then the castigators, I had 1 battle cannon and 2 autocannon. And frankly, I'm always disappointed by the battle cannon. I always think that 1 48-inch range gun that ignores cover is going to come in handy, but I just always wish I had the twin link and the rerolls. So that's probably the one of the things I would change about the list, is just put in 3 autocannons.
Nice. That's always good to be reflecting on that stuff. I know the 1 battle cannon makes so much sense on paper, and then it just never seems to perform. At least not for me.
Yeah, totally agree. What haven't we talked about? The 3 squads of Seraphim.
We haven't touched the Seraphim or the Volgons, which I'm gonna pick your brain on these Volgons.
All right, we'll save the best for last then. The 3 squads of Seraphim, I was hemming and hawing about what I wanted to do with those points. You could, cut some Seraphim and squeeze in another immolator, or you could remove 1 Seraphim and add Junith for CP. You could remove 1 Seraphim and take 2 Dialogats for some more action monkeys. But at the end of the day, I think I wanted the speed, I wanted to control the space, and the alternative options just didn't feel as good with the way the points breaks worked out. And I think we already touched on how useful they are. So, but
yeah, a lot of their utility is kind of in the form of move blocking or going to contest a point, something like that. How did you, I guess, value when to use them? What were you looking for?
So I would say you can always keep them as a rapid ingress threat on an objective that is open and that your opponent doesn't have guns pointed at. So usually I had 1 in deep strike for that reason. I would say they are useful for a contest if your opponent doesn't have at least 6 OC on an objective, and you can shoot and scoot them. Sometimes they're in a position that your opponent really is not even anticipating they can get to your home field, right? So like when you advance 21 inches and then shoot and scoot, I stole a home field objective marker with Seraphim that were staged on my side of the battlefield in 1 game because my opponent didn't account for the fact that they could actually move that far.
Right.
And then, against like heavy melee, no fly matchups, they're great to just like string out right in front of your opponent. And then sometimes you can set it up so that a deep strike, shoot, and scoot will steal an objective. So if for example, most of the objective is on my side of a wall, and the opponent just has a couple models towing on, well, I can look for a target that they want to shoot that isn't the same target that's standing on the opponent's objective because they're behind a wall, but you can still shoot something random and then scoot onto the objective and steal the point that way.
Right. So, there's a lot of tricks you can do with them like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were they
and sometimes you just need
sacrificial?
No. Sometimes, yeah, good question. I think sometimes you needed the damage out of them, right? Like you can, with a 21-inch max move, it's not too difficult to get these ones in the 6-inch range for strength 5. And then you got 3 castigators zipping around. So, 46 strength 5, AP1 ignores cover shots. Can actually put a decent dent in things. So they were also contributing to the damage. I never used the 2 CP devastating wound strat with them. That never felt worth it.
I was literally going to ask that question, Scott. You're reading my mind.
No, never.
I can't imagine it's worth it.
Find something else to throw grenades or tank shock,
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so it's coming together now. You got 3 castigators. Those are kind of self-explanatory. But did you ever reserve any of them, or did they all deploy?
So 2 of them started on the table, and then 1 of them started in deep strike.
Oh, okay. Or in strat reserve. Yeah.
I think it depended on the deployment zone and the terrain layout. If I could comfortably hide everything, then I often started them all on the table. And the other thing that would influence it is whether or not there's like line of sight blocking terrain along the table edges. So if there was no line of sight blocking terrain on the table edges, it was nice to have one as a reserves threat to shoot down the lane. And then, for example, on search and destroy, that becomes a parking lot real quick. So I generally put 1 castigator in reserves on search and destroy.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. I like that kind of breakdown, how it's so situational. I think the success to a good Sisters army is like a lot of situational awareness and experience, because it's such a play in the moment type of army with the miracle dice and just so many options with so few pieces. And by that, I mean, like, you have tanks, realistically, you have immolators, castigators, and you have girls in various different shapes and sizes. But basically, those are your 2 profiles. And the one thing that kind of deviates from that is the Volgons. And now I want to hear from you. Like, I know you love them. Tell me what these Volgons did for you. If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of Dice dice.
So first thing, Nick, I gotta say, the Volgons, the word sounds very clunky. I prefer Nundams. We are nuns with guns, and we're in pretty much Gundams, right? So Morvin Vahl and her Nundoms, I think, are integral. I think for a couple of reasons in the style of list that I've built. So one is you have like 0 melee counterpunch and 0 melee threat without them. So I think they need to be able to project the threat of combat, even if they don't get into combat right away. And without that, I feel like it's tempting for your opponent to just kind of like run into you and tie everything up, partly, without any access to fall back and shoot. And then the other thing is sometimes like there's something that's tough and big and hard to kill, And the way Bringers of Flame brings those things down without Vahl is like weight of firepower and additive damage and additive buffs. So like if you're shooting a Mutalith Vortex Beast or a tank that's T10, like you have to throw a lot into it in order to finish it off. Like Immolator's going to strip cover. You need a couple Castigators. You need maybe get lucky with a Hunter Killer or a multi-melta. And if your opponent has a lot of those things, it becomes a pretty challenging stat check without Morvin Vahl. Like Knights, Gas Knights, like Morvin Vahl makes that matchup a lot easier. So I know that you have a concern about like playing into good play. Oh, and I started her on the table. All but one of my games I started her on the table because there's often a pretty decent place to deploy her. And then, next to the Triumph, she has up to 17-inch advance. So you can kind of get her to where she wants to be. And then I know you're worried about like against good players, they're just going to like control where she is, kite her, screen out your rapid ingress, et cetera, et cetera. But I find that she will get at least 1 to 2 activations and an Overwatch, ideally more, before she dies. She requires a lot of commitment. Well, maybe not necessarily a lot, but a decent amount of commitment where they have to defer shooting at other tanks. And I think that with the amount of board control I have in the list, it opens up opportunity for me to position her where I want her rather than where my opponent wants her. So that's kind of my thought on Morvin Vahl and her friends. What do you think?
Okay, got a lot of thoughts here. First off, maybe I'm just calling her the wrong name. Maybe if I start calling her Nundams, she'll magically work for me.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
I gotta give that a shot. It's user error, of course.
That's funny.
Aside from that, Scott, I think what you're saying makes perfect sense. Don't get me wrong here. I think she offers you the highest damage output that Sisters can possibly get to, and it's sizable, right? Like she'll kill almost anything in the game without really thinking about it. And she activates in shooting and melee at different range brackets. Like there's a lot of good stuff going on there. And like you mentioned, you have no melee without her, so like that's a whole section of the game you get access to. I love all that. I really do. And she's not soft to kill, right? 2 up, 4 up, easily put in cover, armor contempt access, miracle dice. I'm with it. Where I struggle when I use her, and I'd love if you could illuminate like what the disconnect is for me, because I just have not gotten her to work despite everyone else's success with her, is that I find her so one use against the quality level opponents, right? Like she can go out there and shoot a tank to death or whatever, or even 2 tanks to death, and then even charge something, and then she's having like her dream turn. But then she pretty much always dies in response because nobody who's got capability in their army and has the choice to will ever let her live if they have the option to kill her. And then I find she's often just a one-use unit, and 400 points for a one-use unit is just a lot of points for a one-use unit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get that. But all right, let's suppose, Nick, that she has her dream turn where she split fires and kills 2 vehicles, charges something else and kills it. I think odds are you're killing pretty close to 400 points. And I think that you may still have needed something to answer those 3 different units that she just took care of for you. And I feel like often, I don't know, I get more, I play a little bit conservatively with her. And I feel like I start forcing commitments. I start forcing trades with the immolators, with maybe dangling a castigator, right? And trying to provoke positions that my opponent will take that will allow her to activate more reliably without getting hit back. So I don't know. So even if she only gets that, so she'll project threat for first couple turns. Even if she only gets that dream team, she still accomplished what she was there for. And then if she dies, she dies, I don't know. That's kind of how I feel about it, I guess.
You're very okay with her dying after she's kind of nuked an army. Do you find that's hard to set up? I know, like, we just talked about in her dream turn when she shoots 2 tanks, she charges a 3rd. That's probably where, like, I have no issues if she goes down. Sometimes I can only really set up her getting line of sight to, like, 1 tank and range to 1 tank. And then I'm like, all right, I don't really want to trade the Volgons for, like, this Predator or whatever it might be. So I probably just won't use the Volgons this turn. And I feel like if that kind of cadence goes on long enough, all of a sudden we're hitting turn 4 and my Volgons haven't done anything.
I'm just kind of like glancing at the matchups I've had, and I gotta say, yeah, no, she did work in all of them. So
Dude.
no.
Okay. You're the expert here, Scott. Maybe I'm just wrong. That's okay. Awesome.
No, I love her. I love her.
I'm glad it's worked out for you. Okay, so let's talk about your sisters on like a conceptual level. What is this army like actually trying to do on the table? How would you describe that?
I would say I take a pretty aggressive line on it. If I'm going first and I have an opportunity to pick something up, I will often go for it, even if it looks like the initial points trade is not in my favor, because most of the stuff that you use to send out to pick things up are relatively durable. Like if an immolator needs to poke out, or if you have the dominions that can reactive move. And so you introduce like a little bit of the opponent needs to be thoughtful about how they respond, and it can be a little tricky to respond in appropriate force without overcommitting to kill your T10 tank. And so once you're forcing that response, you just need to have things set up in order to counterattack. And then you start taking advantage of killing stuff that they offer you. And if you are going first and pick something up small, you're already taking scoring resources off the table. So I take a pretty aggressive line with them, to be honest. And then there's 6x5 idiot sisters running around that are going to be scoring, screening, and getting me points along the way. And then those 3x5 Seraphim are going to be doing the same thing. So control where opponent goes, pick off resources that are exposed, and force commitments that you're in a position to respond to. It's maybe how I would describe the play and score along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of control the pace of the game. You keep using the word control, and I imagine that's through like move blocking and things
Yeah.
of that nature. What is control to you, like in a game of Warhammer? How do you control the game?
I think if I look back at like most of the games I've won, it's a combination of things. I feel like you end up controlling more space on the board than your opponent. I use the word control to describe how I control things. So we all know that's not good. But anyway, I think having more space on the board to be in positions where it's easier to score, keeping your opponent bottled up and not allowing them to respond if they don't have a lot of fly and you can loop block them. It means constantly projecting threat onto their expansion objective to make sure you can deny primary, whether that's girls coming out of an immolator or Seraphim. It means locking down your side of the primary if you can, which on these deployment zones and terrain setups wasn't as reliable. And I think using those little tricks that sisters have access to skew the map, right? Like a CP reroll on your 4-up save on your Nundoms, or having that 6 in the bank to skew the map of their anti-tank weapons, or, passing or failing the perfect save when you need to, right? All those little things start adding up and keeping resources alive or forcing overcommitments and kind of skewing the map for your opponent.
Right. I think that's a great way to sum it up there. Okay, so you touched on CP as a resource. I know we already covered Miracle Ace a little bit as a resource. How do you manage your CP?
In Bringers, it's actually pretty easy now. You're not tempted by the Deathwound Flamer strat being 2 CP now. So you've got grenades, tank chop, rapid ingress, armor of contempt, overwatch, and CP reroll, right?
Yeah, maybe smoke
so
launchers too. Yeah.
Yeah, smoke. Yeah, I use smoke a lot. I use armor of contempt when I know that either it skews the likelihood of survival, or I'm getting like a big anti-tank weapon and I'm looking at my miracle dice and I know that if I use armor of contempt, it'll work if I have a 5 on the miracle dice. But if I don't use armor of contempt and I need a 6, then I don't have that guaranteed save. So I think using armor contempt in that way to skew whether or not you have a guaranteed save can be really helpful. Yeah, same with smoke if it messes with the math a little bit. Smoke against DDAs with cover or 6 in the bank is I think skews the math unless you're playing Star Shadow where they get the reroll ones. But smoke against DDAs skews the math so that your tank is going to survive against at least 1 DDA, maybe 2. So it can be really helpful.
Is this like math you do in the moment, math you've done before and you just remembered, or something that you just kind of know through experience?
I would say a combination of the latter two. I only play sisters, right? So once I've like thought about, oh, my a DDA is going to shoot my tank. I've done this in the past. I've done the math months ago, or whatever, and it hasn't changed all that much. Maybe something new is introduced, but whatever, right? So I know the DDA is going to shoot my tank. I've done the math before, and I've experienced it before. So now, when I've had that experience and done the math months ago, it still applies now because I'm playing the same faction. I've got the same miracle dice. I've got the same profiles. And so I think that's like one benefit of being a faction specialist, I guess is what people
Yeah.
are called.
Honestly, I
But
think faction specialization, to just tangent right here, is worth more now than it's ever been worth before. Back
yeah,
in the day, not even that long ago, meta hopping was a lot more powerful because when an army was broken, you just, playing that really did give you the best odds to win a tournament or whatever. Now the game is so largely well balanced and deep in terms of build diversity that just knowing your army and those little nuances intimately, I think actually is a really big advantage going into a tournament.
yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And like, I think once you know it, with all the rules changes and new factions coming out, once you know your army really well, you can kind of just stick to your game plan and make like the small necessary pivots to account for the new rules or the new opponent you're facing across the table. And to be honest, that is like the biggest limitation I have as a player is I don't get a lot of reps in. I don't have a lot of time to practice or TTS or whatever. And so I find that the games I lose is often because I've never played this matchup before. I don't know how it's supposed to go. And I did my best with the tools that I have in my kit with the faction that I know. But, maybe I flubbed once or twice because I wasn't anticipating all the tricks they had in their sleeve. And I think that's what catches me most. Um, and I think it caught me actually at this tournament, but is what it is. Like before Edmonton, I hadn't played a game in 2 months. But I think being a faction specialist means that I can still perform reasonably well
That's
when I
actually
go put
insane
my
that you
models on the
haven't
table.
played a game in 2 months and then you won best overall. I mean, that is actually incredible, Scott. I don't know if you know that.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
I think a lot of players fall into your camp, right? Like I'm surrounded by some of the world's most competitive professional war gamers, so I live in a little bit of a unique bubble. But most people, I think, have lives, right? They have families and
Mhm.
jobs and commitments that don't let them play Warhammer often. And while you might be a little bit extreme, not playing for 2 months before a super major, I think a lot of people just play what they play and try to do the best they can. So you're kind of a gleaming example, Scott, of how you can still be successful with that. What would you say is your key to success there? Like, what allows you to stay so sharp on the game without actually playing with it much?
I think it's like a really solid understanding of the fundamentals, which is like move blocking, screening, denying primary, being in position to score secondaries. Like all those things apply to every factor. And like once you get a good handle on them, it doesn't really change all that much, right? And you need those things to win every game of Warhammer that you play. So I think once you get a plan for each of those things, uh, one game to the next feels kind of similar. And then the other thing is like being a faction specialist, right? I don't have to learn new rules. I don't have to look at data sheets. I know how this faction plays. I know how this detachment plays, and I can just implement it. And so like that's a good host of tools for success. And you just have to like do what you can about the unknowns and the inexperience.
I love that. I think that's a fantastic answer, and honestly, the truth to success in Warhammer. Warhammer itself is a skill that you can get better at, and then the variables like army
Yeah,
lists and meta that just changes, and that's okay.
yeah.
Speaking of those changes, I know your list is very reminiscent of, what a classic Bringers list looks like from like 6 months ago. There's a lot of different options you could have explored. New Retributors, Imperial Knights, you had mentioned Canis Rex. I know Armigers have been floated around. Or you could even try just mixing up the own sisters units like Sacrosanct in your Bringers of Flame. Have
Mhm.
you explored any of that stuff?
Well, so it's hard to actually test any of that stuff without having played a game in 2 months.
Right, of
But I've
course.
definitely thought I definitely thought about it. Um, so the different variations that looks like is you could like drop the Triumph and some Seraphim, for example, and you could fit in Canis Rex. So that gives you more, I would say, obvious damage and a more obvious stat check in terms of like toughness vehicles. But what you lose is that speed and that board control and the math that the Triumph allows you to skew. So, the Imperial Knights release wasn't out until after Edmonton, but even looking at it now, it's like, yeah, that actually looks really appealing, right? That's a lot of toughness, that's a lot of wounds, and that's a lot of damage. But I'm still hesitant because I don't know that it's going to actually play the style that lets me be successful.
Right.
And then other
that's
things
a great
like,
way to put it.
yeah. And then the other things like the Sacristans. So if you take 2 squads of Seraphim, that's 160 points. I don't know, maybe tweak something else around. You can squeeze in 10 Sacristans and a Hospitaller. Well, yeah, that's cute. But like, I don't think it allows me to play the game the way I want to play it. And so I think that is why I ended up on the very similar list that I was running compared to before. I did actually try when the Triumph was like super pricey and after our nerfs in the winter. Actually, I think you and I played a game where I played triple Helvrin, and that actually felt not bad. But at the time, it didn't have like any fly and no Seraphim, so it was very susceptible to being move blocked, which I didn't like. Right? Like I feel like you have to. There's like this. There's this like intangible like comfort that you have to feel with how the list is playing on the tabletop, and like how it's hard to describe. Like you just gotta it's gotta vibe with you, right? Like it's gotta move around the tabletop in a way that's comfortable and that you like. You don't want to be put in those positions where like, oh man, I don't really have an answer for that, or oh, I don't like being caged up over here, right? Like,
right.
You don't want to feel that way on the tabletop.
You don't want to feel like you're in an auto loss position at all. And then you definitely, like you said, the jiving with your army, once it clicks, you just will get better results. I don't know how else to describe that.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. Totally agree.
Okay, Scott, just a couple more questions before we head off to part 2 and break down your actual games. Did you find your sisters were like powerful enough these days with respect to how the meta has changed, all these new army releases? Or did you feel like you were leaning on your excellent generalship to kind of win your games in spite of your army?
No, I actually think they're powerful enough. Maybe I'm crazy, but the 2 factions that I didn't get to play that I was kind of curious to see how it would play out on the tabletop were Death Guard and Emperor's Children. And like the kind of cool thing about sisters is like sometimes you just really don't give a crap about how much damage your opponent can do. Yes, your vehicles, you get a little bit, it gets a little hairy if they can just like one tap your vehicle for something at long range. But I don't really care how much you can one tap at close range. If you've made it in close range with me, I've messed up my move blocks, I've messed up my screens, and I've given you something I didn't want to give you. And the whole list keeps the tanks alive and keeps the engine churning. And so like Death Guard, for example, I thought it might be kind of cool to see, I'll just throw Seraphim at you. I'll control where you go on the table. I have 6 squads of 5 ladies. They're going to be all over. I got to watch out for your Overwatch, whatever. But I feel like, I feel like I would have a game into them. And then same with Emperor's Children. I know they're fast, but can I control where they can go with their speed? And yeah, you're going to get stronger as you go on. But like, I chew up Marine's pretty good. I don't really know, right? I was hoping to kind of run into those matchups. So I don't know. What do you think about? Because I played some other ones, but what do you think about power level of sisters, and particularly into those more meta matchups?
Well, that's very interesting that you said that, because I have found specifically Emperor's Children and Death Guard and also Thousand Sons to probably be my worst matchups with sisters, and everything else seems pretty reasonable, pretty playable.
What detachment were you playing?
I haven't tried Bringers in a while, so this is very dated information, or not really.
Take it for a spin.
Yeah.
But were you playing Champions?
I was playing Champions and a little bit of Hallowed Martyrs as well, and I found that all of it just kills like sisters. Man. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, they pass the Sacristan stat check. Yeah, that's the problem.
The right way to put it. Like the T3 1 wound body, even with the Phenol Pain, even with an Invul, even with -1 to wound, it's just not tough enough to handle kind of the newly.
The thing about Bringers is I don't care about passing that stat check, right? Like you can take all my T3 1 wound girls that you want. They're out there to die. I just got to keep the engine going long enough.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, I'm excited to try it. I've got to get Bringers back on the table. They are clearly back in action, and you've done very well with them. So congratulations, Scott. One more question before we head off to part 2. If you had a piece of advice you could give an aspiring Warhammer player who's looking to get better, what would that be?
I knew you were going to ask this question, and I'm actually kind of flabbergasted when you have guests who don't anticipate this question. I think it's hilarious.
Right. You're like, I can't believe you asked me that. I'm like, I ask this every single episode.
I don't remember what answer I gave last time, but this time I've been reflecting on games and like how much I'm enjoying the tournament scene and like what game makes my games enjoyable. And I gotta say, if you're thinking about it, give them the tape back. And if you're thinking about it, let them know you have that rule that's going to totally mess up their plans. And if you're thinking about it, let them know, remind them you've got XYZ in rapid ingress. And, and not only does it's going to make you a better player when you're playing an opponent that has all the information, but it's just going to make games so much more fun for both you and your opponent. And you see all these like Reddit posts about like, hey, should I have done this? Or, hey, my opponent did that. And it's like, guys, like you say all the time, we're playing this game with each other. And if you want to be better and you want to have more fun, be forgiving, I think you'll get a lot more out of the game that way.
You will, like, it's something we preach in Art of War, right? But you will have a better experience. You and your opponent will both lead that game, as friends instead of enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And that can lead to all kinds of connections and maybe a new play partner, a new friend group. I don't even get into all that. You will also become a better player because you cannot rely on, oops, my opponent didn't know my rule, I won that game. That's going to get you not very far. And ultimately, Scott, I think that's fantastic advice. Like playing by intent in every form is just so much better.
Yeah, maybe this is not always the case, but just go ahead and give the tape back. Like, right. Maybe that's like the simple advice.
That's good advice, honestly. All right. I'm super excited to hear about how you actually played your games, how you destroyed everybody with the Nundams, not the Volgons.
Yeah,
notably.
That's right.
And
see, now you'll start doing better with them.
I'm so excited. I feel like I've unlocked a new level of sisters over here. So we're going to go round by round through the Canada Open with Scott Ketcham in part 2, everybody. You can subscribe on patreon.com/AOW40K right now. Get access to this episode along with all the others and our Discord server. But before I let you all go and do that, Scott, where can people find you and your wonderful ideas?
I am on the Sister Act 40K. It's a podcast for Adepta Sororitas enthusiasts. We're on a little bit of a hiatus with our podcast output right now, but we have a wonderful Discord server that we lovingly call the Siscord, where you can talk sisters all day, all night with the best sisters players around the world. I think it's a wonderful community, and it's not like other online communities. You'll be welcomed as a friend and a servant of the Emperor. Also, Nick, got to say, this is not chilling everybody, but I think talking through games that you lose and analyzing games you lose, you learn a lot more from. So I hope to see a lot of you over there too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, folks. You heard it from Scott himself. Part 2 is going to be awesome. Don't miss it. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next week.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.